Okay, this video will show how we can use the Visual Studio Code editor to run Python, Vpython, and Manim programs. I'll be running each type of program in a Visual Studio Code terminal and also in a Windows command. Python virtual environments will be used for everything. A future video, I'll show you how to create those virtual environments. I'll not be discussing Jupyter notebooks. Webvpython is a really powerful environment for working with Vpython programs. Many of you will find it more useful than Visual Studio Code. I'll be demonstrating Webvpython at the end of this video. Here's how my environment is set up. Side by side here I'm showing Windows File Explorer and Visual Studio Code. The main folder in Visual Studio Code that you see here is on my F drive in this folder named Ken VS Code Projects. You can see that we have Manim files, Python files, and Vpython files, and those are all reflected over here. Any changes that you make to these files on the F drive will be reflected in Visual Studio Code automatically, and vice versa. As I mentioned, I'll show you how to create Python virtual environments in a separate video in the future, but here they are displayed on my F drive. I've installed 2 versions of Python into this pyver folder. I've installed 3.8.8 and 3.10.4. Once those are installed, I then created virtual Python environments in this folder here, this pyproj folder. And you can see here then I've got the Ken environment for 3.8.8 and 3.10.4. These are the virtual environments that we'll be using. Next, we'll open up these Ken README files for a quick overview. There's one thing I should have mentioned about the Python virtual environments. PIP is a Python package manager, and I have already installed several packages. Many came by default with Python, but let me show you which ones I have actually installed into my virtual environments. Now the list is quite lengthy, but one of them you would want to see in here for sure is Vpython. So I did a pip install for Vpython. I also did a pip install for Manim. And again, this will all be in a separate video that I create when I show you how virtual environments were created. The README files are all text files, so we can open them up directly in Visual Studio Code. Before we do that, I thought you might like to see which extensions I have installed in my Visual Studio Code. Python, of course, being a very important one. So you may want to pause the video here and look and see what extensions are installed. Let's open the Ken README text file. It tells you that we got 3 tutorial files. They're going to be named P1, V1, and M1 for Python, Vpython, and Manim. It also points out that we can run these in a terminal window of Visual Studio Code and as a Windows command. Each one of these other README files will show how we do that for the particular type of Python file. Let's look at these other README files. We'll start with this one here. And you can see it has instructions to run in Visual Studio Code in a terminal window, and also to run in a Windows command prompt. The same thing will be true for Manim files, running it here, and the same thing for Vpython files. Before we start running some of these tutorial programs, I want to point out 1 or 2 things. The instructions to run in a Windows command prompt always tell you to do something like this. For Python files, they want you to open a Windows command prompt at this current directory. Now there's various ways to do that. I'm going to show you a very nice, easy way to do it. I'll open up the F drive because I really, look here, we want to get to this directory, which I showed you earlier is on my F drive, and this folder inside there. So what we do, we're looking to get to that directory. So I'll get to that directory, Python, which one was it? It was Vpython files. And we want a command prompt at this location. So in this white space over here, I'm going to click, and it changed all this into blue, and I'm going to type CMD right over that and press enter. And now it has opened a Windows command prompt at the precise location that we want it to be. So let's take a look here. So now we have that Windows command prompt with the current directory, the Vpython files. Okay, we're ready to run our first tutorial. Let's choose the Python files tutorial. I'll double click this to open up that Python program, which just does some very simple things, shows us the version that's being executed of Python. That'll help us determine that we're in the right virtual environment, and it prints the sum of some numbers using Python statements so we can see everything is working correctly. So let's open up the README file. I'll double click it and I'll drag it over here to the right so we can have these side by side. And now we're going to follow these instructions to run this, first of all, in a terminal window in Visual Studio Code. The first thing it says, make sure that the current edit window is this file over here. And you do that by clicking on this, and that will make it the current edit window. The next thing it says is activate the desired Python virtual environment using the Visual Studio command palette. Okay, well, what is that? Well, if we go up here to View, here's the command palette. And one of the choices in there is for Python to select the interpreter. Many times this will be way down here in the list and you've got to scroll down and find it. I've used it so much, it's right here. And here's the active one that's highlighted in blue. And I know this is not one of my virtual environments because I put them all on the F drive and in that project folder. And I know that they will all, in my case, they'll all have the word scripts in them. They'll all be in a scripts folder. So this is not the virtual environment that we want, but let's choose this 3.10.4 virtual environment. And I just clicked on it to select it. When I did that, way down here on the right, you can see the active environment. And in fact, if you click this way, if this is your active edit window, and it's a real Python program, and you click this down here, it's the same thing as what we just did. Now to close this window, I'll just go back up in here and click enter. And so go back over here, make sure this is the current edit window. If we needed to save it because we had made changes, we could just simply save it. We've already activated the Python virtual environment. We can see it down here. Now we're going to use the terminal menu item to open up a new terminal. And finally, we're going to run this program. There's two ways to do that. One, we could just click this little button right here, or we can go to run and run without debugging. So let's do that. And we can see here that it ran, and it showed us the version of Python that was being executed. And it printed out the sum. So everything looks good when running from this terminal window. Next, we'll run from a Windows command prompt. Okay, we're ready to run this in a Windows command prompt. Let's get rid of all this stuff down here and follow these instructions. So, open a Windows command prompt with the current directory. So open up File Explorer. We want to go to the Python files directory. So I'm going to have to go up here, go to Python files. Remember our little trick. I'll click in here, enter CMD, press enter, and now our command window is open to the correct spot. So the next step is to activate the virtual environment and not anymore in Visual Studio Code, but activate it in this command prompt. And there's a couple different ways to do this. So first of all, we're going to choose the 3.10.4 environment. And so what we can do is take this and we're going to run this in that command window. So I'll copy it and I'll paste it into this command window and we'll run it. And notice how it changed here. Put this in front, so it's pretty good indication that we are now running correctly in my my Python virtual environment. In the next video, I'll show you this optional way with a special bat file that I've created. But for right now, we'll just stick with this. And the final thing we need to do is just enter the command in that window. So I'm going to copy this command so I don't have to type it, and I'll paste it in here and press enter. And it ran successfully. It created the sum, it showed us the version, and now we have successfully executed this Python program in a Windows command prompt. Okay, I closed down all the other windows and I've opened up the tutorial for Vpython now, and I've got the README for Vpython over here on the right. This Vpython program will simply create a sphere. We'll see this in a minute after we run it. So the instructions, the current edit window should be this, so I'll click on this. Activate the Python virtual environment. Well, it's already active down here, and we saw in the last video how we could change it if we needed to. Use the terminal menu item to open up a new terminal. And the last thing here again is to just use the run menu item to run it. So just like the last video, this time let's just click this button. And it's in our virtual environment. It printed this out, and now this is what Vpython does. It launches a web browser, and this is a sphere in 3D. So if I right click this and hold it down and drag my mouse around, it's a 3D picture. I probably could have picked a better sample, but I think you get the idea. So let me close this browser window. So now we have successfully executed this Vpython program from Visual Studio Code. Next, we'll run it from a Windows command prompt. Before we run this from a Windows command prompt, I want to show you this optional bat file that I've created. You don't need to do this, it's purely optional. It's this file right here. It's a simple bat file that displays my two virtual environments, asks and prompts you what environment would you like to activate. You can enter 1 or 2, and it will enter this command or this command if you entered 1 or 2, which is the same thing as what we're doing here. We're just manually typing these in. So this bash script is just doing the same thing as these. So let's open up a command window at the Vpython. I've actually already got it to the right spot here, so let's type in command. And now we have this command window at the Vpython files directory as we need. So we're going to activate the virtual environment. In the past, we've done it by entering one of these commands. This time we're going to use my bat file. Now be careful, you have to include the .. at the start of it. So if I just type it in there, it would be .. backslash can underscore activate, activate .bat. Which environment do we want? Well, let's choose environment 1. And it's this 3.10.4 environment. And so now the last thing to do is to just enter this command. I'm just going to copy it this time since you can see I don't type very well. And we'll paste it in there and enter it. And we should get the same thing we got from the Visual Studio Code terminal. And we do. We've got the 3D object here in our browser. So now we have successfully executed this from a Windows command prompt. Okay, we're ready to run the tutorial Manim Python file. So I've opened up the README and I've got the tutorial file here. You'll notice the structure of a Manim file. It has a class with a name, and that name is going to be part of the command that we execute, whether we're in a PowerShell in Visual Studio Terminal or whether we're in a Windows command. They're a little different. In the terminal, we're going to enter the Manim files in front of this, whereas in the Windows command we don't. You'll see that here in a minute. So let's run this in a Visual Studio, in a terminal window in Visual Studio Code. We'll make this the current edit window, and we need to activate the virtual environment. It's already active from the other things we've been doing. We'll use the terminal to open a new terminal. And now we need to enter the command. Well, I have this command. When I create Manim files, I put the commands up here as comments in the top line. So I'm going to copy this. It's the same thing that's in those README instructions. I'm going to paste it right here and enter. And the first time you do this, it may take a little bit longer. What Manim does is it creates a video for you, and with an animation in it. And so this video is a very short one. Let me run it again here so you can see. It's only a second or two long, so you've got to be watching. It creates the circle. You saw it get created, and it has axes. So if we go look at this, sure enough, we had created a circle, filled it with red, opacity 0.5, and we drew some axes. So this worked great from a terminal window in Visual Studio Code. Next, let's run it from a Windows command prompt. Okay, run this from a Windows command prompt. We want to get to this directory for the Manim files, so we've done this many times. So we'll go up here, go to the Manim files, do our little trick, command, and now we have our command window open at the location that we want right here. Activate the desired virtual environment. So let's stick with this. That other one's a little bit old. So we'll copy that and paste it, run it. So we now have an active environment. And now we have to enter the command that's appropriate for running in a command window. And in that case, I have it up here, so I'm going to copy this. I'm going to copy it and go down here and paste it and run it. And it's doing the exact same thing that we did earlier. I'll run it again. You can watch it and see the animation. And now we have successfully executed this Manim file from a Windows command prompt. Much earlier I mentioned that Webvpython, which you get to at glowscript.org, might be a better way to be managing Vpython programs. So I've signed in, and let's go to my programs. I don't have any public programs right now. I have some private ones that I just copied and maybe modified a little bit. And so here, I don't know, let's look at this one here. We'll look at the edit, look at the actual code for what it does. Creates a box and a sphere, so, and maybe some axes. Let's take a look. We'll go back over here and we'll actually run it. And it's a 3D application, so you can use your right mouse and drag it around, and there's some very elaborate things that you can do. You can click the help button here and it'll give you links to all kinds of help. So you can choose a 3D object, so for example a box, and it gives you all the information about the parameters that you need to do for a box. Typically it'll give you examples. You got canvas events, mouse clicks, all sorts of helpful documentation. Let's go to this Vpython 7 website and we can look at some examples. And so they give you all these examples that you can run. So here, let's run this one. Okay. And so you can see all sorts of different examples. So I just wanted to show you GlowScript before we ended all of these tutorials.